populations evolve, but how? We have 5 different ways that populations can evolve. Remember, a population is a species, one type of species that all lives in the same place. That is not to say it is every member of that species, but one species living in the same space. Okay, so that's our definition of a population. Okay, so 5 different types. The first one is directional selection. Number 2 is negative selection. Number 3 is sexual selection. And as stated in their names, they are all a type of natural selection. So Charles Darwin, natural selection. The last two, number 4 and number 5, are not types of natural selections. They are alternatives. Number 4 is known as gene flow, and number 5 is genetic drift. And we are going to discuss all of those in more detail. So first, we have directional selection. So our definition is natural selection that favors a particular trait so that it is present in virtually every member of a population. My example for directional selection is antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which is actually not a good thing, but it is an example. Resistant bacteria. All right, so my picture is showing a person. This is, their mouth, teeth, tongue. A person, and on their tongue are very tiny microscopic bacteria in the form of some sort of staph infection. So I don't know, maybe it is sore throat caused by a staph infection, maybe it is a sinus infection, I don't know, some sort of bacteria. So to treat this, you go to the doctor, you get a prescription. Your prescription is an antibiotic. Its job is to kill that bacteria. And it does that really, really well. That antibiotic that you take kills almost every single bacteria over the course of the prescription. So, 5 to 7 days or 10, I don't know. But there is that one bacteria that still lives. That one bacteria didn't just get lucky. It's not like it was hiding out in a really good place. That one bacteria has some sort of genetic anomaly. So here's that bacteria, of course, drawn way larger than what it should be drawn. That one bacteria has some sort of allele, some version of a gene that probably was created by a mutation that allowed it to live through that antibiotic. So it gave the bacteria the ability to live in the presence of that antibiotic. Gave the bacteria ability to live. For that one bacteria, that is awesome. Long live the bacteria. For us who, we really don't want that bacteria to live, that's not cool, because that means that when this bacteria reproduces, all of their offspring are going to have that same allele. And so we now have in our mouth, or this person does, a bacteria that is resistant to that antibiotic. So the antibiotic is no longer effective, which is not cool. Not cool at all. But again, this is an example of directional selection in that one specific trait is selected for. In this example, it's the trait that gives that bacteria the ability to live through that antibiotic. So all members of our new species have that same allele. Okay, so we have directional selection. Number 2, negative selection, is natural selection that disfavors a particular trait so that it becomes extremely rare in the population. Example of negative selection, I have some little mice drawn here that have 2 types of fur, light fur and dark fur. So if in the early stages of spring, where our grass has not turned green yet, so everything's just kind of brown, the little mice are out, having light fur gives them an advantage because they are a little bit more camouflaged to predators. So our hawk, I should have drawn my hawk beforehand. So hawk flying over is going to be able to see. Oh, this is a scary hawk. Our hawk is going to be able to see the mice with the dark fur a lot easier than it can see the mice with the light fur. So therefore, the mice with the dark fur all get eaten. And if you are eaten, that means you are no longer able to reproduce, and therefore the dark fur alleles, the dark fur genes, do not get passed to offspring. It's important to note here that in this one case, it would seem that dark fur would be a bad trait and that light fur would be a good trait. But that is very, very dependent on the environment. Next spring, it could be completely opposite, or even at the end of the summer. Maybe some dark fur mice do survive that long, and maybe their habitat has changed just enough to give them an advantage. So what is deemed good and bad is determined by the environment, but our environments are continually changing. So what's good today might not be good in 3 or 6 months. So keep that in mind. The good alleles versus the bad alleles will be constantly changing. All right, sexual selection is a form of natural selection based on the fact that individuals with certain traits are more likely to be chosen as mates. So it's important to remember here that reproduction does not occur randomly. Organisms choose their mates for specific reasons. Reproduction is not random. If an organism has a certain trait, it is more likely to be courted, and then it will be more likely to then find a mate. This is one of the reasons why sexual dimorphism exists. And I'm going to define it, and you already know some great examples of sexual dimorphism. This is the difference in the appearance or behavior of male and female members of a species. For example, like I said, you already know some of these examples. We have a lot of members of the bird pheasants. The male pheasant is the pretty one, and again, its whole reason is to attract a mate. Pheasants, deer, the bigger the antler, the more likely it will be chosen as a mate. Peacock, the male, I don't know how to. The males are the ones with the big, beautiful tail feathers. Pheasant, deer, peacock. This is where you guys always, help me with these examples, because now can't think of any more, but I know there's so many more where the male, it's always tends to be the male is got prettier features, all to entice a female to mate with. Okay, I might have to come back to give more examples here. All right, those are the 3 types of natural selection. The other 2 ways that populations can evolve are not types of natural selection. Number 4 is gene flow, which is the movement of alleles into or out of a population as individuals join and leave, which increases or decreases genetic variation in the population. So for my example here, I have some grasshoppers, and we have 2 sides of a river. On one side we have some lighter colored grass, on the other side we have darker grass. One grasshopper over here has some sort of mutation that causes his exoskeleton, skin, whatever it's called on a grasshopper, to be darker colored, which kind of helps it out in its darker habitat. So that grasshopper is going to be able to reproduce a lot faster and produce more offspring because it has an advantage. It gives it some camouflage. So that grasshopper and that allele specifically for the darker coloring is going to become more and more popular on that side of the river. Don't really know how fast grasshoppers reproduce, but here they go. More and more grasshoppers with that dark coloring because they have a little bit more camouflage. Since they are separated with the river, the other side does not have that allele yet. But it's possible that we get a grasshopper that is able to all the way over. What happened? Jump all the way over. Maybe they jump off this little rock here and join this side of the river. And so therefore we have gene flow, a new member. Use the little rock as a springboard. The other side of it, introduce a new allele into that population. So that's gene flow. Members joining or leaving, which changes the amount of genetic variation. All right, number 5 is genetic drift, which is the random changes in a population's gene pool that are not the result of natural selection. And there's 2 types of genetic drift that we will talk about. The first type is known as the founder effect, which is the loss of genetic diversity population formed by a number of individuals from a more original population. All right, for the example of a whole bunch of ladybugs, we'll call them ladybugs, green, red, blue, all sorts of ladybugs, over time, our river starts to do some erosion. It's washing away the shore, so much so it gets more and more and more, and I've created a brand new island, so it's no longer connected. My little ladybugs, they can't swim, so if they're on a different island, they are completely separated from the mainland. The bugs cannot go back and forth. So this is actually how some species become endangered. They're even more endangered due to the bottleneck effect. Some endangered species are even more endangered due to some endangered species are even more endangered due to the bottleneck effect. This again limits their genetic diversity. They all are more and more similar to each other. which is actually very risky for a population because if something new arises, if some new challenge arises, it likely will wipe out the entire group. If something can kill one, it will kill them all if they're all genetically similar to each other. If you notice, the 3 of the 4 bugs that got secluded on the island are all blue, which means it's likely their offspring will be blue, and therefore this island will probably be blue bugs everywhere, maybe a few green ones here and there, but we've decreased the genetic diversity of that new little population that got formed. The other form of genetic drift is known as the bottleneck effect, which is the loss of genetic diversity in a population in which the number of individuals able to reproduce is limited. This happens when the size of a population is reduced, leaving just a few to reproduce and reestablish the population. The perfect example for this is one we've talked about already, Darwin's finches from the Galapagos Islands and Daphne major. We started with finches of all varieties, so some that have a bigger beak and some that have a littler beak. And this again is before the drought. However, after the drought, we know that all of those finches with small beaks were not able to survive because the seeds were available to eat were the hard, tough seeds. So if you were a finch that had a small beak, you likely starved to death and were not able to reproduce. However, the finches with larger beaks did have lots of food, so they were able to reproduce, and therefore the island was populated again by those finches that survived, so the ones that had a big beak. So they were able to reproduce, and so every finch then had that same trait with the big beak, which allowed it to eat the hard, large seeds. So this is after the drought, where the big beak was much more common than the small beak.